Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, the last descendant of an ancient brotherhood that was dedicated to safeguarding the secrets of a timeless evil.
Tim Longo. Wow. I feel like halfway through the intro, you started just slowly meandering into Kane. And
Now I'll do the rest of the episode this way.
Oh, geez. No, don't. No. Just kind of was naturally happening now. Maybe you just naturally sound like him all the time. And
I just twist the little dial on my vocal fry. That's all.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's
Nice.
not just ladies with the vocal fry, gentlemen.
Okay. Yeah, good old. I mean, I feel like the one-liners in this game, or at least the dialogue choices, are just. I just feel like we're always quoting them. It's sort of like quotes from Star Wars movies. You know, you just kind of come out of your mouth during a given day of a bunch of geeks, being together.
Yes,
and just automatically, you don't even think about it. And then same thing with
Diablo. I don't know if I ever told you about the time Jonah Loeb, who used to be a 3D modeler, character artist at Bethesda. He was doing some outfit for a character, and I showed up and I was just watching, and I said, "I find his lack of face disturbing." Because the face model wasn't part of it. It was just like the clothes, right? Because that's how Bethesda does stuff. Yeah. And he's like, "Did you do that on purpose?" And I'm like, I don't even know anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. They just come out. Yeah, totally. It happens all the time, especially anything with like a big, machine of destruction, like a Death Star. It's just like,
that's no moon.
Yeah, that's no moon. That one comes up all the time. But then with Diablo quotes as well, I feel like,
yes,
stay a while and listen or what have you.
Yeah.
Just
I sense a soul in search of answers.
Yeah, and I think as we talked about last episode, it just has a lot to do with how many times people played this game, especially
how many times you heard it.
How many times you heard it, and especially we did a little bit of co-op, though I completely snafu'd that on my schedule.
That's fine.
But you just got in there, and because there was no saving, you just kind of rinse and repeat, and you're just playing over and over and over again, and in co-op. And yeah, man, and I think that's another reason that we've also talked about is just why the music is so etched in my brain forever.
Yeah, especially that town music. Yeah,
just so. I mean, luckily it was good. It's like a Mario theme or something, right? It's good music, which probably is a testament to its quality that it stuck so well. But anyway, yep. We're here.
Yeah, it's important for any grindy game, a game that you're going to repeat sections over and over and over again. I mean, I've been playing some Kingdom Hearts lately.
Oh, have you? Oh, yeah. Surprise. Huh.
And, but there's parts where I'm like, oh, okay, now I need to do that to get the trophy for leveling to 99. Well, I'm just going to be in this level for a few hours or whatever.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And you hear the same music over and over again, and it's helpful if it's good.
Yeah, battle music, especially in JRPGs, right?
Right, battle music.
Hearing that battle music over and over again. Yeah.
Yep.
Speaking of music, the music in Hell was some weird stuff. I forgot about how there's this snare drum military kind of thing going, which was also like, why? But just very disconcerting and appropriate to the feeling. And then the moans and groans and screams were even worse. Oh man, terrifying. And then you throw in some Blood Knights. I don't know if you encountered that enemy.
Oh yes, I think the Blood Knights are always on the 16th floor.
I had them in.
You can get them elsewhere as well.
Yeah,
yes, I had them earlier as well, but I think they're always down there protecting Diablo. That might be part of the military stuff, as you've got these knights that are there a lot.
Maybe that's stretching.
It might be stretching.
I think it's just creative decision, but those Blood Knights, man, as a sorcerer, not good. Not good. Yeah, really rough.
They were not great for me as a warrior because I have to be up next to them, so I there were times where I got surrounded and had to really fight my way out and get free.
Yeah.
And it could be really touch and go. I can't remember if I died on the 16th floor at all, but I definitely died earlier. In fact, I had gone all the way down to the final floor and realized I mean, I had tons of potions, but I didn't have a town portal, and then ended up having to climb back up to whatever 13 to exit.
Oh, how funny! Yeah,
Yeah,
I have the town portal.
I just went through them all. There were so many, blood knights rather, and acolytes were the other ones I had down there, which I think is also, I think that's pretty frequent. I don't know if it's all the time, but I think so. I feel like those last two levels are mostly blood knights and acolytes. So
yeah, they're a good combo, right? Because ranged and disappearing with the acolytes, and then rushing in melee,
yeah,
and then different. Well, no, I guess I actually ended up with those. The succubi had a different.
Oh, right, I got the succubi on the 15th floor, and the acolytes,
But again, a good example of sort of the comboing that they would use that we talked about last time with the encounter system, to force you to mix up your stuff and then make it, just for me at least, make it really hard on sorcerers, because you have to, if you want to be most effective with your mana, I had to switch spells a lot. Ultimately, lightning ended up working pretty well, but blood knights were, at least the ones that I met, were either immune to lightning or just very ineffective. And so, my strategy ended up literally just being running around as much as I could, casting Guardian, and I just let the Guardians do it for me. But Guardians cost so much mana, I just basically had my whole backpack full of mana potions, literally, and I'm just running in circles, casting Guardian just by the skin of my teeth, and just waiting for them to whittle it down, because I couldn't do enough damage to them with like Firebolt or something that I'm firing, because once they get to me, they're just, they kill me in 3 shots.
Yeah.
So I couldn't ever let them get to me. But because of that, I had to have something like Guardian that I didn't have to aim, because I was literally always running away.
Right.
So I'd create these sort of like, hallways.
You'd be dropping turrets behind you as you ran.
Behind me, forcing them to get hit by multiple turrets at the same time through like narrow hallways and stuff. But when you're doing that for a whole level, or in this case, there were two, like, I think it was like 14 and 16 had blood knights on them. It's just takes so much time and energy, and I'm not doing very much because I'm having the Guardians do all the work. So it wasn't even that fun.
Yeah.
So that was a bummer, but I did have, the cool thing about the sorcerer by the end is I have a lot of utility, right? Like in your example, I had, the town portal spell. So
right.
As long as I have mana, I'm good. I never found the identify spell, which would be nice. But I pretty self-sufficient as long as I had potions. So
yeah, that's the critical thing. I mean, for me, those ranged enemies were far more irritating than the blood knights, just because they weren't doing much in the way of damage to me. I had maxed out resistances to everything, so I was fairly resistant, and so those were more nuisances. But then actually tracking them down so that they weren't hanging around when Diablo showed up was stressful. Just a lot of trying to find it, backing them into corners so that they couldn't teleport away, and then misclicking and being, oh no, I stepped too close to this wall. Oh no, he teleported along the other wall. That sort of ending up chasing him in a circle to try to find another corner to pin him in, at times a dozen, or whatever, or more at a time. So
that's I mean, maybe we're jumping straight in, but that once you open up that room with Diablo in the room, the fact that there's so many enemies in there with him, it is a terrifying moment, because you've had such a grueling time just getting to that point. At least I did, because I was so squishy. And then you're like a boss, it's the equivalent of like something worse than the Butcher, surrounded by some of the worst enemies as well. I actually ended up lucking out somehow, because I died multiple times, but in one of those times I was able to kind of pull him by himself, and I didn't actually even deal with any of the other enemies, and just kind of like let him chase me away, and the rest of them kind of just fell away and didn't find me, and I just him and I in a corner duking it out, and me just spamming. It was just hilarious because I had max resistance as well, so I was doing okay against him, and he didn't seem to have sort of like a melee attack. He would kind of bump you, but it wasn't like a sword attack or anything. So I was able to kind of stand right next to him, and I had mana shield on, which, critical for sorcerers.
Right.
So any damage he was doing was just going straight there instead of my health, and then spamming lightning at him while I was spamming the potions, and then he just eventually died. So it's sort of a little bit anticlimactic, but
yeah, it was. I would say it was for me too. I mean, I did not kite him away, and all that. I had him in front of me, and then was surrounded by blood knights. So I was in it. I had a full bar of health potions, and just was letting them get down as low as I could because they were all the full healths or whatever.
Yeah.
Letting those get as low as they could, and then just hitting the next number on the bar as I clicked madly at Diablo. And yeah, I killed several of the blood knights just getting to him, and then he showed up. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's what I'm dealing with now, because of course once he dies, they all die. So I just focused on him at that point. I don't know if I would have survived if they had been left after.
Right.
So yeah, no, I would agree that it was a little bit anticlimactic in a similar sort of way. It's just like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing I've done with everybody else. I'm just beating on him and hoping I outlast with the potions and time my potions right.
It's interesting that that's the case compared to, say, something like the Butcher, which was also sort of like rushing in. He does have a fire attack, which if you're not careful, you have to move, right? Because he basically spawns it at your feet. The thing that I forgot about and was a little surprised by, though, is that from a boss design perspective, because by that time, I think a lot of people are going to probably have max resistances on things. There wasn't anything really forcing you to change up your tactics in a boss fighty kind of way. Do you know what I mean? So it's like you're kind of you're equipped. You just need to withstand the damage being done, but there really isn't really any, tactics to it.
Yeah, no, it's just a slugfest at that point.
Yeah, and it's, and jumping to, an anecdote from possible bonus episode we'll do, but, in Diablo 3, for instance, the boss battles are a lot more modern, in even the Butcher, right, where there's special attacks and you have to like worry about your placement. And so anyway, obviously
it's more like Kingdom Hearts is what you're saying.
I don't know if I'm saying that. My memory of Kingdom Hearts is also not very much strategy, except for one boss. But yeah,
that's because you didn't do the secret bosses.
Fair enough. Also, I know I'm being dismissive.
I know you
are. But yeah, it's such a funny game because of that. Once I'd killed him, I did remember how it was always anticlimactic to kill him.
Yeah. It's almost funny because it's a little lull before you get that final cutscene, which is like, whoa, the first time you ever see it. It's like, what? When
you mean as far as what happens in the cutscene?
What happens immediately after? Prince Albrecht's body appears as Diablo is dead or whatever, and then you take that gem. Yeah, and he was Diablo, right? And then you have that gem in your hand, and you're like, wow, he's looking at the gem, and then what? So, I definitely remembered that.
Yeah. Well, then and then how it ends, right? When you get the end credit there of like,
the end,
and then you're there standing there with the cloak on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if you remember, but I haven't watched it in obviously many years, but the trailer / teaser or opening of Diablo 2, is this whole concept that you're following your character from one, across to the east,
you're chasing after him, right?
Cloaked figure, and that is just brilliant. It's a little nice touch, right? Of this kind of like, oh yeah, I spent so many hours with that character that basically has sort of tried to house the soul of Diablo, and of course he failed. They failed. Couldn't, just got overwhelmed or whatever. And anyway, it's kind of an interesting connection you don't see very often, even though we're not talking about Diablo 2 here, but it's cool. There's not much story in these games, and so when there is some of that clever stuff, it's, I think, worth mentioning.
Yeah, for sure. And the story that it does have, and this isn't something we haven't really touched on very much, but the lore does come in kind of these book dumps or long dialogues by Deckard. In the case of here with Lazarus and all of that, which we should probably talk about. But the lore is just kind of like, oh, and here's some exposition for you, and that's very infrequent. It's like once every 4 levels, maybe, and a couple towards the end, and just a lot of stuff all at once.
It's dense. There's a lot of proper nouns, and I did write a silly note down on just to mention the font that they use in the game. It's like, it's the most Gothic, like, over the top font.
Yeah, it's like Celtic Gothic. It's and really too much.
There's only capitalization. The O's have X's through them.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just hilarious. But it's so, like, we've talked about this in one of the episodes, like, it's so true to tone for them. Like,
absolutely. It's melodramatic.
They knew what they were doing, and it was consistent the whole way, the identity. And that's very admirable, and even in the font choice, they could have easily not done that.
Yeah. No, they went all in on the fonts. The all caps kills me. That actually, I kind of forgotten about that, but yeah, it's really funny.
Well, just when you're reading something and and it's subtitling, sort of, it's just like, yeah, man, everyone's so serious here.
Yeah. It's like old German or something, if you've seen old German written, it's just very hard to read. I mean, this is a lot cleaner than old German, but just like lots of serifs and extra lines in places. And like you said, the crosses through the O's and stuff. Yeah, it's a lot. Oh boy. Yeah.
So you mentioned Lazarus, elaborate on that a little bit, on that moment, which I had forgotten about.
Yeah, it's funny. The game that came to mind playing through the Lazarus part was Planescape Torment.
Oh yeah, totally.
And that dungeon where he has to keep dying to teleport or whatever it is. I don't remember the specifics. I forget what that was called, but he basically has to go through these bunch of teleporters, and the teleporters, I think, kill him, don't they? And he reconstitutes on the other side.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But of course you don't do that here. But this was really weird, right? So you go down to the 15th floor to find Lazarus, and Lazarus and his staff, and him having been the priest basically who kidnapped Albrecht to Prince Albrecht. Prince from whom? Like, what's that about? We don't know. We're just gonna it's just Prince Albrecht. You got to go after Prince Albrecht.
Wait, are you joking? Are you making a joke there about Leoric?
No, I mean, none of that other stuff was in this playthrough.
Right, in our playthrough.
Right? So all you have is like, oh, the prince is down there, like at the top. And then you get down to the bottom, it's like Lazarus has kidnapped Prince Albrecht. Deckard's telling you all this stuff, and you're like, oh, well, okay, I'll go get him. And the staff.
Well, even before that, you find Lazarus's staff just sitting in one of the levels, but you have no idea.
Right.
I thought that was a weird. They do have some weird quest logicking things going on,
Yeah, and well, that's a point where you have to take that thing and you have to bring it back to town, or you won't get it won't progress. You won't know how to go down to 16. And in fact, you don't even go down to 16 at that point, right? You go to some other spot.
Portal.
Yeah, you go through a portal, and then you come back, and the floor is open, so you can go to 16. But anyway, you go to Lazarus's little pocket dimension or whatever it is, and and there's, I forget which succubi they are, but there's a specific succubi that's there that you're fighting a bunch of, and you ultimately have to track down Lazarus. You discover a corpse of a boy, which is pretty grim stuff. And you end up, he says, he monologues a bit, and then you have to kill him. And he's basically the same pattern as those other acolytes, where he teleports a lot, and you have to sort of try to back him into a corner so that he can't move, and just wail away at him, or at least I did. Because
that's warrior. Probably easier for me because I can fire in any direction. No, I didn't think about that, but yeah, for a melee warrior, probably those are a little more irritating. For me, it's not as bad because I just change my aim.
Yeah. But yeah, he has captured this. He sacrificed a child, presumably to summon Diablo, and by killing him, then you can make your way to the actual 16th floor. I wasn't really sure about that connection, why that was true. I may have missed something there, because I was so busy clicking with the acolytes, which is also kind of a problem, right? That if you kill the main guy first, you may miss something, right? Because you're so busy dealing with other stuff that's going on, right? That's a real risk there. I guess they presume that you're going to focus on the lots of little guys you can probably kill easier. But I sort of didn't. I did a little bit, but then I had an opportunity and I went for it and I killed him, is my recollection. But you end up teleporting all around this level. You go here and teleport to this other place. Oh, and then now you're surrounded by succubi, and then you teleport, or then you walk out of that room, and now you teleport to another room where there's more succubi, and then you end up going back to where you were to teleport back to. It's like jumping around all over the place. There's no real obvious mental map there. It's sort of a puzzle, I guess. I mean, it's more just explore to find a thing you can step on that will glow and send you somewhere else.
Yeah.
There's no intellectual effort.
Process of elimination. A little bit like that shrine that I clicked on in co-op.
In co-op, yeah. We'll put co-op in quotes, since being in front of you was very dangerous.
Right, yeah. Well, co-opetition going on there. Yeah. But yeah, it's just a little interesting, different kind of experience mechanic there with just teleporting around, which I don't think happened to me any other time in single player, at least.
No, definitely not for me. Yeah. It's the one time that you do that. I mean, there may be something I missed. I never did find that suit of armor called Valor. It was way up in the 5th through 8th levels. But yeah.
Did you have because I think that's one of the quests that's may not.
I had the quest.
You had the quest. Oh, interesting. Well, did you have the quest with the elixir?
I did get that one down at level the 13 or 14 or whatever.
Leoric's lieutenant?
Yes.
Or what have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, which just ended up being elixir sitting on the ground.
Yep. Yeah, just lying there in the middle of nowhere. Yep.
Looks like a rejuvenation, potion. Like, I could have very easily missed this.
Yep.
So that's definitely a flaw that has popped up a few times as I've missed multiple things here and there.
Yeah.
Myself, mainly because I'm looking at the map too much and not looking at the level. But yeah, and then as a quick aside, I think we talked about this last time, but in all of our playthroughs for single player, at least, none of us ever met Leoric,
right?
Which is one of the key figures in the lore and history of the franchise, to be honest. And not only that, but other quests and other storylines in this game they don't rely on it, but it'd be nice to know something about Leoric, and they reference him. But then, of course, we didn't get that quest, which is a weird decision. So then we don't even know anything about him. So if this is the first time I'd ever played, I'd be like, who's Leoric?
Yeah. They
keep talking about. And so that I didn't know that was even possible because of the random quest thing, which is, it's good. It's obviously they put it in there to mix it up and to make it interesting for multiple playthroughs and stuff, which is definitely good. But feels like maybe a little bit different kind of logic could have been done there too.
Yeah, it also just feels like that's some of their best stuff.
Yeah.
The Butcher and Leoric is some of the best stuff. and it's just weird that they made that. If it would have been me, it would have been like, okay, you're gonna get this, and then we'll pick one other thing from this bag. You're always gonna get the butcher because he's always gonna be terrifying, and then you'll get some other thing. You'll get the Gadbar of the week or whatever his name is, or Garbad or whatever it is. Or the guy with the tavern sign. You'll get something else. But you'll always get the butcher because that's cool. Or that you always get the poisoned well or whatever. I mean, I don't know if the poisoned well. Oh no, the poisoned well, the poisoned water supply is the other thing with Leoric, I guess.
We always got the poisoned water supply, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I guess, yeah, you're right. On the other hand, I guess with a game focused on replayability like this, maybe there is an argument to be made for that surprise for something very cool like those two quests popping up, when you play a second time, you're like, oh, I've never seen this, holy cow, look at this butcher thing, so it is definitely, it's a hard one to figure out what the right call is to make there. But
yeah, I mean, I guess the game is short enough, that for that era, people would be replaying it and would know, okay, I am going to replay this. That's part of what this is about. That's why the dungeons, although there's no messaging about the dungeons changing, at least in game.
No, I mean, yeah, that's true. The manual.
So if you're a hardcore single player gamer who just was like, this is the next RPG I'm going to play at the time, you might have just missed what was special about this game and been like, not for me. Right. Yeah. I mean, you might be not for me anyway, but you wouldn't understand why it was such a big deal to other people. I think. What's the big deal? It's kind of boring dungeons. They're all kind of just a little samey, or whatever,
right.
And and then lots of just reskinning of enemies, and I mean, it was fine, I guess. If you only played through it once, especially if you didn't get like the butcher or Leoric or whatever. Like there was no real quest system, or I can just see the complaints, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And at that time, I think those would have been really valid complaints, very common complaints, right? When the model would have been more something like the Gold Box games or other games we've talked about, the Eye of the Beholder type series or Might and Magic series, or just any of those Ultima, play through once type games, would be like, wow, this was really short for an RPG.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like now that you're mentioning it, I do remember some of that criticism, even that the sort of like people saying, "Oh, this isn't a real RPG," I play real RPGs or what have you. They're this length or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, it's I think in my head I must have merged all of this stuff together because obviously, most likely played once or so single player and then played so much multiplayer. I didn't even remember or realize there were randomized quests, So
yeah,
I don't know what retconning I did in my head, but it's it's sort of a weird statement to make, but there's sort of an argument to be made that this game didn't need a single player version. You know what I mean? It's almost like the whole point of it really was in a way that sort of that replayability of a co-op. I mean, I guess, yeah, you can replay it, I guess. And as somebody mentioned in mail, you can take a single player character and replay the campaign with them and thus get different different quests and stuff. I guess up the difficulty, right? And then, doing a nightmare run was definitely something that people would do as you leveled up, even in single player. But, and so I guess the one advantage there is you could save, right? Versus just doing the same thing in multiplayer. But there's something magical when we popped into the same game though over the weekend, even though it was short. Man.
I had the itch right away.
Yeah, totally.
Right away, I was like, maybe I'll play some more tonight. I'm like, no, I can't. I have Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, no, of course, yes. I've got sucked back in on Switch, to be honest, in Diablo 3. So I've felt the itch in other ways.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, one of the other topics that we didn't hit too much was kind of talking about level design in a weird way, right? That was one of our topics that
That was,
we.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't think it's a long topic. I think I wanted to mention it though because we had some suspicions about how they would construct things, even though it was a procedurally generated, different every time kind of game from a level design perspective. They definitely did still have sort of a seed to create a flow with their Brett's suspicion is tile based
Right,
chunks. So
right,
not only were each individual hallway or room tile based and modular, but then they had sort of macro tiles as well, whether it be like the butcher's room or the area around the butcher, or like a hallway with a bunch of columns, on both sides. And so if you're playing multiple times, you're going to see these sort of archetypes of chunks of a level together. But obviously you don't know what configuration they're going to be in. But at the same time, something that I think the reason I wrote this note down from last episode is we were playing the caves, and it's interesting that even though it's a procedural game, they still were able to make interesting choices occasionally when it comes to level design, because the caves were very open, right? There were
right.
big kind of open areas where, and in my case, because I'm a ranged base, caster, I could really sort of not manipulate the sort of guide and kite enemies around because of these big areas, and use my spells in interesting ways that are really hard to do in hallways. So even though it's procedural, I guess my summary is that they were still able to get some interesting level design choices combined with some of their enemy choices and combat, attack types, to make it interesting. I guess it's not really the case for a melee character too much. You're still having to run up and deal damage, so maybe it's not as interesting. But because I had never played a sorcerer before, I did find some interest in that, and I thought that was interesting for the time because it was procedural.
Yeah, so I mean, my understanding of how that was done is that larger tiles were authored. They made a bunch of them, and they just slot in with the other tiles that they're gonna put down. My recollection is it's actually 4 macro tiles, and all of the stuff is authored in them, and they're just sort of described by data to say this is what other piece types they connect to. Things with type A on the right side, for example, or the east side, tie into type A's on the west side. The northwest versus the northeast, and and so it's just has to fit. It's just like, oh, you just have to draw a thing for, oh, it doesn't fit, put a different thing there, draw another one out of the bag of tiles. That's my recollection. I didn't have time this week to go and research that, but I do remember that being part of the discussion, is that it was authored that way. Spelunky is a modern example of a game that does basically the same thing. There's a lot more tiles. I think there's 12 or 16 to a screen or something like that. But it's the same system. They fit together. Right. He does some analysis on it to make sure that it's passable. But Diablo's levels are built to be passable, that you can always get to everywhere in a section regardless. You'll find that
it's very circular.
Yeah, it's very circular, and anything that's kind of got doors and things like that where it's enclosed rooms tend to be off on the sides, fully enclosed rooms and things like that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And you can definitely, actually, the more you play, I think the more you start to see these things again. You'll play something and you'll go, oh, wait a minute, I think I've actually been in a level just like this before, right? And that could happen with a fully procedurally generated thing as well, but it'd be much less likely, and you'd have to probably play a lot more to actually notice that pattern. I've been playing Spelunky literally for years, and it took a long time before I was like, oh, I can actually start to see the tiles. He does a little bit more because he actually erodes. He does some erosion of some tiles as well. After he's put them all together, he does little changes. He might even insert some sorts of stuff. There's multiple passes. So anyway, it's but I think it's because they authored the individual pieces, these larger pieces, that you get that sort of level design feel.
Yeah.
It feels like a compact, and you get the sense, especially as you go to these different sections, you feel a different authoring style at work for those big pieces. So they carry this different feel.
It's almost a little bit of like a hybrid approach, right? Where it's procedural, but there's still chunks that have some identity, if you will. And
and I think they can because they're larger, right? I mean, if it's like a board game like Castle Ravenloft or Betrayal on the House of the Hill or whatever, it's going to be a lot less. It's not going to feel that way just because the tiles are too small to feel like there's something cohesive about them. Because typically in those games, it's one room, right, or it's one hallway or one whatever. And as you're adding things on, you have to sort of find ways to fit whatever room you're adding so that it makes sense. Anyway.
Yeah, they did. And of course, they still do that today with Diablo 3 as well.
Yes.
You can see the chunks, and, it's obviously 3D versus 2D. But it's all, like Brett said, much like a tiling texture or something where it's going to work on various sides, no matter where you put them together. And I would assume, I haven't played Rogue in a long. I mean,
it's 3D rendered, but it's still 2D.
Yeah, that's what right. Yeah.
I mean, it's nice in 3D though that you can put decoration, right? That's a little bit different, but
right. Yeah, but I mean, in Diablo 3, it's still literally 3D, fully, right?
It's a fully 3D engine. I just mean that the layouts of the levels, I think, are still primarily 2D.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's still essentially isometric.
Still isometric, right? Yeah.
Essentially, there's still perspective at play,
right?
But they definitely fool with the. Yeah, we can talk about it in our bonus episode, but they fool with perspective quite a bit and effectively. It's not as simple as just moving the camera. They actually build their environments very specifically for their camera. So we talk a lot about camera on that podcast. I think it'd be interesting to talk about that even though you can't manipulate the camera there, it's still something interesting.
For sure.
With Rogue, I don't remember how. Do you remember how? I'm trying to think. What's the farthest back procedurally generated level design?
Rogue and NetHack, I think, are.
Yeah. And were those tiles, or were they literally like procedurally generating?
No, they were procedurally generating with rooms and corridors, and they're. Let's see, how is that done? I've read algorithms. There's good algorithms on how to do this that have been around forever, that basically date from this time, and I just don't remember the particulars at this point. But they are basically. They basically grow out rooms from their main path and add stuff to it, I believe. Basically carve more out of the negative space to do that. The levels start as having nothing, and they plop down an entrance and an exit, and then they have to make sure that those things connect. But they actually generate all the rooms, I believe.
Yeah,
procedurally.
Well, my summary on this topic really comes down to, sort of the fact that, and of course I'm an X level designer, so I think about this stuff more than I should, but even in a procedural game like this, there's still, and as Brett said, it's more of a hybrid, and Spelunky's an even better example, to be honest, but, level design can always be, and should always be a consideration for, as a partner with gameplay design, and I just had forgotten that there was really any in this game because it's such a simple game, but there is a little bit going on there.
I mean, I implemented one of these things once, maybe 10 years ago, just out of curiosity, more like Moria or Rogue or NetHack or whatever, just like, oh, how do you do that? And I did it. I was like, oh, okay, that's how you do that. And then promptly forgot about it. though I probably still have the code somewhere. We got a
Yeah.
lot of computers in this house. But the the thing I was going to say about that is those levels do not feel authored, right? I mean, you can. There were even going back to like D&D first edition. If you went in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide, there was like a quick dungeon maker guide, and it was just like tables, right? And then lots of descriptives and things like that. But if you actually just followed that to the letter and just kept rolling dice until you felt like you were done, you didn't get something out of it that felt like a real place in any way.
Yeah.
And the real credit to Diablo's approach, hybrid as it is that those levels feel thematic and like a real place. Obviously a giant gothic sprawling place or whatever, but like you never have the friction in your brain of like, what's this room about or anything like that. You know? I mean, I think that you're helped by it's like, oh, it's crypts and caves and
I think the art treatment of it. There's occasionally like, why is this room leading to this room kind of stuff, but generally it's pretty effective because they chose locales that would make sense that they would be a series of catacombs or you know, and it's like of course these are going to be winding around in kind of weird ways,
right. Right, because that's how real world catacombs are built, right? We dug this one, and then we needed more space for more bodies, so they shoved in a room here, and then it turns out even more bodies. I mean, you go into the actual catacombs of Paris, and it's like this, right? I mean, it's more. So I mean, the one thing I don't think that this game does care much about is actual support of the superstructure, right? He just assumes that everything's going to be held up, but that's fine because you can't see the ceiling, so you don't know that it doesn't make any sense, right?
No architectural. That is something a good level design does, but in this case, not necessary.
Yeah, not really necessary because you can't see it. So yeah, if you go into the actual catacombs in Paris, it's not like this in that every space is used because there has to be support somewhere, but an awful lot of space is used, and it is very windy, and it's easy to get lost down there, which is why you're not allowed to leave the guide. So,
oh wow, I haven't been to that. So.
Yeah, well, that's where I left my third kid.
Okay,
Albrecht.
Oh man, you beat me to it. I was about to say it. And it was your fault that Diablo is unleashed upon the world.
Yeah.
And the series only expands on this as we go. Diablo 2 gets crazier with its hybrid procedural approach because they go to deserts and all sorts of cool places and outdoors, and so. And then 3 becomes more of a modern situation. So. But it definitely influenced a lot of games the way that they did this. So, what other topics did we have?
The only big one we had left from you this week was the spell acquisition that you wanted to mention.
Oh yeah. Hard, not maybe a big one, but what I wanted to say about it that kind of dawned on me not until the last episode did it dawn on me is because I'd never played a sorcerer, as I said, or sorcerer, is that what it's called?
Sorcerer.
Yeah, sorcerer. So it's because it's wizard in Diablo 3, so I'm mixed up. So I never had really experienced this, but one frustration I have that is a very weird decision, in my opinion, is spell acquisition is also based on the RNG of the drops, of the loot drops. And so, rather than a spell skill tree or choosing your spells or what have you, it's really kind of at the whim of the drop tables, which, yes, admittedly gives you more reason to play, say, a multiplayer game or to play multiple times. So you're kind of, farming for all of those. But it's not, I don't know, it's sort of like, it's not as fundamental as like, yes, I guess you're doing the same to find weapons for a warrior, but you can always swing whatever you have. You're just getting different types of the same thing, but for me, like, I never got certain spells. In
Right.
fact, I don't even know what some of them are because I didn't fill out my spell book. And it's just kind of based on what dropped. And so spells are such a fundamental part of this character. To have it be random, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is in the sort of replayability goal that they have, I get it, but it is a little bit weird for me, because it's sort of, you're just at the whim of that for something like, basically my core verb is using spells,
Yeah.
and I have no control over what, not only that, but even leveling them up, right? Like some spells I really wished I could have leveled up, but I never got more books, so it's like I'm out of luck.
Yeah. The
So,
leveling up is, I can see, being a tough thing. I mean, with the playing a melee focused fighter warrior, um, I expected to use. I basically wanted to have a one-handed weapon and a shield. And although I got a lot of shield drops, I didn't get a lot of one-handed weapon drops. And at
mm,
some point, I actually bought a sword as well that was decent, and I used a lot. And then ultimately, I had that anvil quest or whatever, and got the one from Griswold, which I think is what I finished the game with. Um,
mm, yeah, so
and
not so
so
that was
I
like
didn't.
mid game.
I had the same sort of random drop problem. I got a ton of bows. I'd be like, oh, another magic bow. Oh, great.
Mm, uh,
And so I wasn't going to use that. And towards the end of the game, I was just leaving them, because at that point I didn't care. Although most of the time I would, despite the fact I wasn't going to use a thing, and this I'm playing a single player game, I'm not going to play this character ever again. I'd still bring all the crap back to town and identify it.
because you never know.
You never. Well, it wasn't that I would use it. It was that I actually used the money to buy. You can buy elixirs from what's his name, the healer dude, Pepin or whatever his name is.
Yeah,
What's his name?
Adria has some too. Yeah.
She. Oh, does she? Okay. I didn't. I almost never went to see her. I didn't bother with the staves at all after a while. And it would only be if I
Yeah,
accidentally
potions
picked
are fine.
something up.
I didn't. I actually never went to the healer because I didn't need healing potions.
Ah, okay. There you
I would
go.
always go to her, yeah, because I needed
Yeah,
mana potions.
gotcha. Um, yeah, so we visited different people, but I ended up needing a lot of money just to keep buying potions
Yeah.
of strength, or elixirs of strength and elixirs of dexterity from him. And he had elixirs of magic as well, but I just left those.
Right.
I didn't buy those. So I ended up using quite a lot of my money for that, more than anything else. And so it was good that I had brought the things up, and identified them and sold them and all that stuff. But it was very rare that I picked something up that I used for myself. That was a weapon. I did, like I said, defensively. There were some shields and a helm at some point that I picked up. That was like, oh, I'll use that. But yeah,
Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess it is pretty much the same thing. Uh, when it comes to like waiting for that thing to drop that you need. But yeah, I
but in
guess
multiplayer, you just end up playing the same levels over and over again,
yeah, yeah.
right?
I don't know.
So
I think for whatever reason I put spells sort of in the skills category, and it just seems funny to me to farm for my skills. Do you know what I mean?
sure.
Even though it is kind of the same thing for swords and stuff that but you didn't have to farm for the ability to swing a sword. But I'm overthinking it.
Correct, but I mean that's oh, I'm gonna do an axe, more damage per
Yeah,
swing or whatever. I don't know. There's different differences like that. Or am I going to use a bow? I could have used a bow, presumably.
yeah. Are there no ability or no weapons that have damage types on them? Because that's the other thing is like I don't have like a straight just damage type spell. It's either fire, electricity, blood, this sort of. You know what I mean? So it's like
Oh, right.
also
So all the weapons obviously do just pure physical damage,
damage.
but there are also swords that additionally do fire damage, or additionally do lightning damage, or what have you.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Couldn't remember.
it's in addition to the base physical damage.
Yeah, got it. Couldn't remember on that one, but yeah. The other quick note that relates to this that I just wrote down, or that I wrote down that I forgot to mention. This is a small topic, but um, and you've brought this topic up a bunch with the WoW example and stuff. But the sort of concept of loot balancing based on loot you can use. You mentioned having a lot of bows drop, right, where you don't need them.
Yeah.
And of course, I had plenty of things dropping on mine that I didn't need to use too. And as the series goes on, they get better and better at that. They allow you in 3 to share your stash with all of your characters, I believe. So if you
Mm-hmm.
find something on one character, they're kind of encouraging you to go start another class to, like, if you find a really good weapon for a barbarian and you don't have a barbarian or something. So that's kind of an innovation for that cross pollination.
Yeah, I feel
But
like they might have done that in Borderlands 2 as well, one of the Borderlands games anyway.
Yeah, they might have. Yeah. But it is interesting. Like there's got to be some sort of tuning and balancing with that problem to some degree, though. Even though I got a lot of shields and swords that I didn't need, I also got some things that were very good for me. And so there's still a seeding that happens, I would assume, on it can't just be pure random. It's got to be, because I ended up with, I don't know how many legendaries you got, but I ended up with some pretty good. I think I mentioned the armor last time. I ended up getting a bow, or not a bow, a staff that was kind of uniquely appropriate for me. And I'm always curious about how. I know we can't really answer it here, but I'm always curious about how that sort of math is working. To make it feel like, oh, I'm getting a bunch of random loot and it feels random, but then occasionally just enough, like there's a sweet spot in there of some sort of number where you get just enough of the things you need so it feels gratifying and it feels like it's pulling you forward because you'll eventually get something cool if you keep playing. You know what I mean? If you're just discouraged by just getting a bunch of bows the whole time, then you'll start losing interest. So
Right.
you need that occasional win, but you don't want it to be winning every time you open a chest, even though you think you
Yeah,
would
because
want
it's
to.
the same problem.
Yeah,
It doesn't. It's
exactly.
not special after a while, right?
Exactly. So it's a fine art to that I feel like this is one of the early games that really found a good sweet spot there. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it must be doing something there. I did end up with a legendary armor and or I guess unique, I guess is what they say here.
Unique, yeah.
Unique and unique sword from the quest with Griswold. I feel like they were mostly with quests.
I think I lucked out then because I had probably 3 uniques drop from like chests and stuff.
Oh, I'm not
Um,
sure I had that many. Yeah.
and that's not including the one from Quest. So all of my slots were unique by the end.
Oh, really?
Um,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
No, that was
Some of them,
definitely not true of me.
actually, one of the good ones dropped off toward the end, dropped off of one of the named sub bosses. That was one that I remember. That might have been the staff. I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's just nothing better than that moment, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty great. Yeah.
It's just like, oh, what? Oh. So, yeah, the gods, look down favorably on us.
The
On me.
random number gods.
Yep.
That's what
Yep.
RNG stands for.
Oh, oh, nice. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna steal that. Good. What's RNG stand for? Oh, it's random number gods.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Yep. In
Oh,
assembly, it's usually RND, which stands for random number deity. So
boy. Oh, game development geek jokes. Uh, yeah, so that was probably our main topics before we can hit our
yeah,
takeaway. Huh?
yeah, we should do that since we're already at 55 minutes. Holy mackerel! Um,
Time
we tend to
flies.
go on about the Diablo, don't we?
Yep. Yep. Babbling on, babbling on. Well,
Okay.
you want to
Well,
start with? I usually start. Why don't you
no, you
start?
start. That's fine. I usually respond to yours. To be honest, I don't do the homework on the. I've got too
Okay.
much else to do.
Well, as usual, I think we've talked most of these to death, so I don't think they're very there'll be any surprises here. But the first one, I guess these aren't in any order. I have 4, but I think we can pretty quickly go through them. Um, I think the full embracing of procedural, sort of in multiple elements of the game, was a big takeaway, at least from my memory of a modern-ish game at the time. Now, of course, this is not the first game to do procedural. We know that, and we've referenced some of those previous games and such. But taking a genre like an RPG and doing that in a pretty convincing way, both at the time, fidelity wise, as well as tone, which is I'll get to in a second. But yeah, embracing procedural, and thus kind of the knock on effect of that being sort of the endless replayability of that, and the just one more minute, just one more, chest, just one more kill feel of it, was sort of revolutionary at the time for this genre. So that's my first takeaway. Procedural everywhere, and apparently even a little bit in the Quest, which I didn't know. Not fully procedural, but some randomization at least.
Yep. Yeah, for me, I think I would go with the biggest one being the real time, right?
Yeah,
it has the feel and the specific way they have the real time, which is basically they run a bunch of turns, which is basically how it was implemented over the course of a weekend. They had a turn-based game. He just ran more turns.
Oh, is that really
yeah
what's happening? It's just literally real-time turns?
Yeah.
What?
Yep.
It doesn't seem like that would be performant, but is that, I guess it doesn't matter?
It probably doesn't really matter, because you only have to do things like path per click, if it, and that's only if it's on an empty square besides, right? So some things you actually don't have to do that frequently, and you can cache the results of pathing if people keep clicking on the same square besides. I'm sure there's lots of tricks like that are going on as far as that goes. But yeah, you can. I think that contributes to some of the weird herky jerkiness of the movement, and like the way the enemies come up to you and then stop and then attack. I think all of that is all kind of tied into how that all works and feels. But regardless of how they got there, the shift to real time and like we've heard in email, again, not the first game, but the best game probably up to that point, right? This is the one that found the sweet spot with the formula of the real time, much like World of Warcraft had with the real time strategy game. Not the first one, but another one that was. What did I say?
You said World of Warcraft.
Oh no, yeah, I meant Warcraft. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, you've just got these games that have found a real time sweet spot for something that had been typically more turn based in the past, and yeah, just that aspect alone of I actually got up to go get some water or something while I was streaming this past weekend, and I was on a floor that I knew I had cleared, and I just left the game running. And I came back and the chat was like losing their minds because, oh my God, you just left the game running. You didn't pause while as if I was going to get attacked. I'm like, that's all right. This level's clear. Because I was going back to find some of trying to look up some of the quest stuff that I had not done.
Right.
And like Garbad and things like that. I was like, I forgot about that guy. But yeah, no, the shift to real time was a really good shift, and made this game. If this game had been a turn-based game, permadeath roguelike, would not have worked.
No, it wouldn't. It would have worked, but it wouldn't have had an impact.
Right. No, we wouldn't be talking about it. Yeah. I should say that. I mean, the game probably would have been. It probably would have been twice as long, right, or whatever.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah. I mean, to your point about the Warcraft analogy too, like this is our second Blizzard game, and that really kind of became their MO. You made the Freudian slip of World of Warcraft, but typically when we talk about MMOs today, World of Warcraft is the one that's mentioned, even though I played a lot of EverQuest and Dark Age of Camelot, but Blizzard, took,
and I played a lot of Mud.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you are older than I am, much older.
No, I'm just not afraid to read.
Oh, yeah, no, that's not my strong suit. But it's like they tend to take a formula and perfect it, in a way. Even though in this case they were merging formulas with real time, I guess in a way they probably were trailblazing earlier in their company's history than later when it comes to innovation. with both Warcraft and this one. But yep, action based. Agreed.
Yep, made a huge difference.
My second one is really sort of the focus on the loot system and really delving very deeply into what I would arguably say is one of the most influential loot systems, in gaming. And I think a lot of people don't realize that legacy there. And as we talked about, even things coming down to, color classification of loot that we use across most games today started, though it didn't finish here, it started here, and ultimately Blizzard and with Warcraft and with Diablo II kind of started perfecting that a little bit more. But just the random loot, the sort of statistics and property-based loot combinations to create, I think I was looking in the manual or somewhere, maybe in the wiki or something about, I think this is like over 200 monsters or something like that is said, or maybe that was on the GOG site, kind of in the bullet points. It's like over 200 monsters, and it's like, wow, that's a lot of monsters. But then, as you play the game, you realize it's sort of combinations of
12
things
monsters.
Yeah, 12 monsters, but using these different properties, right? So it actually does change the gameplay up. There's certain ones that are ice centric, and so if you use fire against them, it's all the rock paper scissors stuff. But it was all sort of the randomness of that, which we talked about in the procedural section, but then putting that on the loot, where you have the sense of that chase, right? And so seemingly this feeling of endless loot with all of these different capabilities, and so the loot system,
and a critical part of that with the loot especially is that I think the genius thing was like not having just a sword +3 with plus 6 to 12 fire damage, etc., but having a sword of the firebrand or whatever they call them, right? Having those extra decorations to the names, that when you pick something up, you'd be like, oh man, I remember the first time I got something that was of the whale, right? Playing multiplayer, it's like, oh, I didn't get that on my normal playthrough, but I got it on my my multiplayer game on whatever, the second hardcore or whatever. So having those, throwing that into the tables of like, oh, I'm gonna get a weapon type of the such and such, right? And they all have that pattern. You can see the pattern, but they just give it that decoration. Oh, if you get these attributes, you also get this name. Brilliant.
And they had some sense to them, right? Like of the bear,
right.
had
gave
certain
strength bonuses or whatever. Yeah, stuff
like that.
Whale was a health bonus, and
and then staves. I was always looking for staves that gave me more magic attribute, and so it's like the staff of sorcery, staff of sorcery, and then the staff of wizardry was like the best one because it gave you plus whatever to magic, and so there's the themes there. So in a way, to your point in the naming, which is it's an excellent point. It's almost like improving upon the D&D model in that case, rather than like you said, +2, +3, +4, or whatever. It's actually naming the same things you would have in D&D. You would still get excited about those in D&D, but they didn't really have an identity. It was more of just stats. And that's been, Borderlands is actually a good example of a sort of another genre that really adopted that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Millions of weapons.
Yep. Millions and millions, billions and billions. That's my Carl Sagan.
Okay. Yep, I got it.
Okay. Staff of the Nova. I was going to say that the tone and the art direction that supports that tone, which is too. There's also sort of the writing, the voice. I mean, all of that stuff is all of a piece, and it's very consistent. We've talked about that this episode. I don't want to go into it too much, but I did want to talk about the lighting and how smart that lighting system is, and just doing a very simple trick with the 256 colors that they have. To just shift up the table a little bit to be more light is just brilliant. When I heard that part of his talk, David Brevik's talk from GDC a couple of years ago, I was like, oh man, of course that's the way you do it. That's super smart. Now, they didn't do it exactly the right way as they probably wish they had, etc., but it's kind of brilliant. And it works so well. And sure, you can tell that that's what it's doing. But at the time, none of us probably really knew what was going on. We're just like, wow, this is really, really cool lighting, for example. So I feel like everything really came together to make that, because that's a technical solution to a problem that, like we said, talking about Diablo 3, where they're doing all of that strictly with their art direction, because you can basically do whatever you want with the lighting. You have to make very specific choices. Here, it's the other way around. It's like, we want to achieve this tone. Can we come up with something that will work? Right? I mean, not just like we can do anything, so let's just pick what works. It's more, we have to actually come up with a technique that's going to make this work. I want to have real-time lighting in this game, or what seems like real-time lighting. And to do that with a palette shift is really sharp, really smart.
Well, it's a good example of a lot. I think we talk about on this on the podcast quite a bit of, and especially in the older era of game development, where these very clever economical, solutions with great constraints were being, employed, and to do these clever things that you don't think about, but they were under constraint, that they had to think outside the box. And I'm not saying we don't have constraints today. They're just very different, weirder constraints. And we use engines that sometimes are multi-purpose and stuff, and somebody else might have solved, like if you're using Unreal or something, somebody else has solved solutions like lighting or materials or something, right? So you might solve different challenges with a new engine today, but it's just very different, when back here, like you said, their palette was so limited and their memory was so limited, or what have you. In the case of like Pokemon, as you had some good examples in Pokemon's case, and I just love those stories where it's like, this is how they thought about it, and constraints really breed great creativity, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last one that I didn't write down that I'm thinking of, that is a mini one that I'll just mention. There's sort of an overall air of simplicity to the game as well. I think in the first episode, I brought up the point of skill points and stat sort of distribution, and the way that that's done in a very simple way. You don't have a whole lot of stats on your quote unquote character sheet. And then not only that, but you can spend the points wherever you want to. So it gives you a simple way to sort of specialize yourself, if you want to. But overall, that system is very simple, compared to a lot of RPGs, especially D&D based RPGs. And to Brett's earlier takeaway of action based, I think those two go hand in hand. You wouldn't want an action based game to be super complicated, though maybe Path of Exile proves me wrong on that. But we're in a different time today. Just the overall sense of even the quest system. I think we talked about this on one of the episodes. It's barely a quest system, but it's there, and it kind of keeps track of the one or two things you're doing. You don't have a long quest log. And even dialogue trees and talking to people, they're not trees. You're just going and getting whatever they have to say based on what quest you're doing at the time. And so overall, very simple. And I think it really worked well with that sort of just one more minute, one more kill feel, especially in a game that is highly replayable, where you're going to be doing this stuff grinding over and over again. I feel like this is sort of like one of those early games where the grind was a word you'd use a lot, and farming. That was my last one.
Okay. Well, my last one is one we haven't talked a lot about, but we probably will in a future episode. And that is multiplayer.
Oh yeah, of course. That's a good one.
Not something we've talked about, because we haven't really talked about that impact on the game, other than kind of as an aside to a lot of the topics we've discussed. But I think that also cements this game as an all-time great, in a way that it might not have had it been a single-player only game.
Definitely not.
I think that having that experience of pushing your luck and having permadeath because it was a multiplayer game, and some of the anecdotes that you brought up just tangentially of like, oh, can you jump in with me? I need to corpse run. Like, yeah, that stuff is great. That stuff is gold. And you would not have, this game, I don't think, would have had the lasting impact without that, quite frankly. I think that really makes a huge difference to the longevity of this title. It made for a reason. I think a lot of these loot systems and things like that, even that you've discussed, you wouldn't have quite gotten all of how great it was if you hadn't played it a bunch with the same character, even because you're just continually chasing more and more and more in a way that I don't think comes through entirely on the single player game. So yeah, I think that's I don't think we need to discuss it a lot because I think it kind of speaks for itself, but I think that multiplayer longevity is really huge to the game. And I think if it had been a single player game only, it would have fallen to obscurity, really. I mean, there would have been people who played it and loved it and whatever, because there always are. But I don't think it would have the place in the firmament that it has. So
no, I mean, it was 4-player as well, right?
Yes, 4-player.
4-player, and then not only the loot chase for yourself, but also remember trading a lot, right? Because people are going to get different loot, and like, oh, I was playing last night and I got this thing that'd be really good for you, and then you kind of toss it on the ground, and then
sure, yeah, just
like this very fluid, back and forth, and like I said, the corpse runs were hilarious, and and the permadeath is actually a key aspect of that, right? Where you can't save, so right. It's like it really it kind of creates more of a camaraderie in co-op in that case.
Yeah.
So
I would even go and play with strangers. I remember doing that a lot.
There were people on when we were trying to play.
Yeah, there were people jumping in left and right. Not to our games, but yeah.
No, but when we popped on, I was surprised to see other games I could have joined.
Yep.
Still for Diablo 1 from GOG. So that's, that's something else, that experience. I'll never forget it. Hopefully we'll get to play. We're going to try to play some more co-op, aren't we? We're going to try to do that.
Oh yeah, next weekend I think we will try to get some more, and I will stream it again. And this time I'll take my laptop downstairs and stream it in my basement. I'll actually be playing on one computer that's going to go out to a TV through a splitter, so it'll also stream into my other computer, so that I can see the chat and everything like that a little bit easier than it was last night. But yeah, we'll find time to do that this weekend, because my laptop has a HDMI out, so I can just do it like any other console effectively.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have a lot of time, so that was not my bad. But we had some hijinks there, even in that short amount of time.
Yep.
I'm really good at shooting you in the back. And,
yep, I might start a sorcerer instead. I mean, or a rogue rather.
Yeah. So those are our takeaways.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think we could also mention the music. I mean, there's a number of things that we've touched on multiple times.
The core
voice acting, the audio is all great.
Yeah, but the production value in general was quite high for the time.
The what?
The production value in general.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Video and music, audio work quite good. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you have it. Diablo 1.
Diablo 1. Boy, we're not going to get through any of this at this point. We have so much email.
Well, thinking about that, I mean, luckily we have at the very least a bonus episode, and I think we can announce our guest, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that seems like it's nailed down. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, you just mentioned him earlier in the podcast.
I did,
because he did a great postmortem talk at GDC a few years ago on Diablo 1. And so Dave Brevik's going to be coming on. We have secured him for the next episode. And so that's going to be exciting. We haven't had a guest on in a while. We've done a bunch of games from the East, which we have a hard time getting guests on for, as we know and have gotten feedback on. So we'll continue to try to work on that. I don't know how, but we had a good line into Dave. So so we're going to have him on.
I'm really looking forward to that, because he is, we're basically, the three of us are contemporaries in terms of age. And he basically went straight from school to programming professionally from undergraduate. Whereas I didn't have a computer science undergraduate, so I went and got one, a graduate school degree in computer science and then went into games. So we have a little bit of a difference there, but I feel like we would have started at the same time had we. I mean, we started on the same machines and everything. He was an Apple II guy as well, I believe. So yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to him. Total contemporary of ours in that way. So yeah, that'll be super cool. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to spend some time doing research between now and then so that I have some good questions. I don't want to cover tons of old ground, but I feel like we'll have to do a little bit because not everyone will have spent that time. But yeah, I'm totally looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. He's one of the co-founders of Blizzard North and co-creators of Diablo. He's on his own right now, but he's been in the space of this kind of game, ever since. So I'm sure we'll have some good stories to tell. So yeah, that's going to be exciting. And I was just going to say that even though we didn't get to email, which we have a bunch of good ones, we could do some after the interview, and then we also we'll probably do a bonus episode, right?
Yeah, I think we'll do a bonus episode where we talk more in depth about the multiplayer. Although I think we've covered it a lot, but especially to look at Diablo 3 as the latest from this team, or latest from this company. I shouldn't say team because I'm sure there's basically nobody left, but which is maybe something we can talk about too at that point. Because the franchises go on, but the teams who made them don't necessarily. So that's an interesting thing too. But yeah.
Play on Switch on that, or what do you?
Yeah, we can play on Switch. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to play on that platform because it's such a unique situation for Diablo. So I think it'd be an interesting bonus episode because of that.
Yeah, for sure. And we can probably stream that as well.
Yeah,
so that'll be fun. Quick last thing, since it's the last episode in the series, Brett's Book Minute.
Oh, that's right.
A recommendation here. I don't read a lot of books about people going to hell, so there's no direct connections in my recent reading that made a lot of sense. But I did read a book back around Halloween by Tanarive Due, who is, I believe, an African-American author of some horror stuff, a lot of genre stuff. She's fantastic. I've read a few of her books now. The one I wanted to recommend was called The Good House. It's the reason why it was brought to mind is that it involves possession, the possession of human beings by otherworldly forces. There's no gems being jammed into skulls or anything like that in this book, but there is the sense of wrongness of somebody's body being taken over by some other force, and it comes about in numerous ways in the book. Highly recommended. Quite creepy. If you like horror books, and you've been looking for something after reading all of Stephen King, you might give it a try. In fact, it's better than, it's better than a lot of Stephen King. Stephen King has written some garbage as well as his very good books. So there's, I say it not really that it's worse than the best, than the least Stephen King then, but it's a really solid book. I really liked it quite a lot, and I would recommend it to folks. And it's got this sort of different perspective coming from a different voice as well. So that's kind of cool. Because I don't read I haven't historically read a lot of horror by people of color or women. And this is, as it turns out, both. And so that's also kind of interesting. But
yeah, it sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great book.
What's that? You don't read any books about Satan worshiping or anything like that?
Not that I'm willing to disclose on the internet.
Yeah, you don't want to put that in a public record.
I usually can't pronounce the titles without a whiff of sulfur coming to the room, and maybe something appearing. So I just want to.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm usually I'm delicate with those books because they're printed on human skin.
Okay, you just kept going with that one. I was just throwing one out there a little bit and then moving on. You're like, no,
yeah, I'm just gonna run with that. I'm just gonna keep going.
Yep.
Anyway, that's The Good House by Tanarive Due. Forget that stuff I said about the skin book. All right, well, I guess we will call it there because otherwise Tim will miss some ferry and he needs to get home. And so I guess we will see you next week with an interview with Dave Brevik. You can find me streaming us playing Diablo a bit, probably this coming weekend at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I also stream most weeknights, usually Monday through Thursday. A little bit of a weird schedule this week, but I should be on Thursday, the day after this drops. Where can folks find you on the internet, sir?
At Tim Longer Jr. with a JR at the end for Twitter.
And of course, you can find the podcast there as well at DevGameClub. You can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com and find the show and its notes at devgameclub.com. Thanks so much for playing games with us this week, and good night.
Good night.